In the spring of 2016, every machinery lot in Chase County, Nebraska, was telling the same story about planting. The story sounded different depending on who was speaking and what he was trying to sell. At the dealership it sounded like precision, uptime, row unit control, and the future arriving right on schedule. At the co-op it sounded like emergence uniformity, acres per day, and the kind of sleek confidence that only appears when weather has not yet started humiliating people. At the bank it sounded like efficiency ratios, debt justified by labor savings, and the assumption that newer equipment does not merely work better but belongs more honestly to the age. But it was the same story all the way through. Old drills were for small men, backward acres, and county fairs. Real operators planted with systems. Screens. Modules. Meters. Electric drives. Variable rate maps. Midnight capability. That was the phrase people liked best that year. Midnight capability. As if darkness itself had finally been conquered by enough wiring. In that county, if a man still kept an old grain drill in working condition, people did not take it as evidence of seriousness. They took it as evidence of personality. Maybe he was sentimental. Maybe cheap. Maybe suspicious of technology in the broad, almost moral way modern agriculture enjoys attributing to older farmers who ask awkward questions. Whatever the reason, the county assumed the same thing. The machine belonged to another era, and the man keeping it alive belonged there with it. One of those men was Vernon Kade. Vernon was 72 that spring, lean as a cedar post, slow in motion without ever appearing frail, and quieter than most men found comfortable. He had farmed wheat, sorghum, and dryland corn on the same broad shoulder of country since the Johnson administration and war age like the land war wind, plainly, without apology, and with more endurance than spectacle. His place sat 8 miles north of Imperial on a rise that let a man look west in late afternoon and feel, if only briefly, that distance itself had weight. The machine shed by the house held a faded pickup, an old diesel tractor, a welder older than some hired men in the county, and against the far wall, under a canvas he actually bothered to tie down, stood a John Deere FBB grain drill first built when Eisenhower was still president. It was not beautiful in the way auction flyers call old things beautiful. The paint had gone dull decades earlier. Several seed box lids were a slightly wrong green from repairs made in 3 different years. One drive chain guard had been hand-fabricated after a bearing threw itself loose in 1989. The press wheel arms had been bushed, rebushed, and finally rebuilt around hard-won geometry Vernon trusted more than factory new. But the drill was straight. The seed cups were honest. The feed gates still adjusted true. Every grease zerk took grease. Every cracked bracket had been repaired by a man who understood that alignment is what saves iron from becoming scenery. To Vernon, the drill was not an antique. It was a known quantity. And known quantities in farm country are worth more than people admit right up until uncertainty starts charging interest. Vernon had not planned to become a defender of old drills. Life had pushed him there the way it pushes most men toward their convictions, one season at a time, through disappointment, correction, and the occasional expensive lesson. In the 1990s he had leased a newer air seeder for 3 springs and spent 2 of those springs chasing problems nobody had bothered to mention in winter brochures. Hoses split. Metering drifted in wind. Electronic rate controls developed opinions that bore no relationship to seed actually reaching the ground. Dealer support was always friendly and rarely immediate. He had gone back to the old drill, added simple modifications where simplicity deserved help, and carried on. By 2016, he used the drill only on selected acres, cover crops after wheat, emergency sorghum, forage mixes, and a few late-season jobs where exact, reliable placement mattered more to him than speed. He did not apologize for that. He simply kept the machine ready. In town, they laughed at it. Not with open cruelty. Rural places prefer their cruelty deniable. They turn it into remarks that can later be passed off as teasing if the weather changes the scoreboard. At the co-op coffee counter, a grower named Brent Milliken once said Vernon's drill ought to be parked next to a steam engine and a one-room schoolhouse. A salesman from North Platte, young enough to think software updates were a form of wisdom, asked Vernon if he charged admission when people came to see the museum piece. Even Vernon's nephew Cody, who respected him enough to help every fall, occasionally shook his head and asked why the old man kept that thing when newer equipment could cover in one night what the drill took a day and a half to finish. Vernon always answered more or less the same way. Because it still knows what seed is. That line circulated because it sounded like old man humor. But Vernon never meant it as humor. He meant that a machine should remain in honest contact with the task it exists to do. Seed in. Seed out. Depth. Spacing. Ground speed. Chains. Gears. Steel. Not interpretation. Not translation through screens, sensors, harnesses, update files, and factory-approved mysteries. He was not anti-technology. He was anti-opacity. That distinction mattered more than the county understood. The year 2016 had already made people bold before the first planter rolled. Commodity prices were not glorious, but they were still strong enough in memory to keep operators aggressive. Winter meetings had overflowed with demonstrations of high-speed planters, integrated guidance suites, section control refinements, cloud-linked monitoring dashboards, and one especially impressive nighttime video showing a 36-row machine planting at a pace that made older men unconsciously check their own pulse. The county loved it. Men came home from meetings quoting acres per hour figures the way boys quote batting averages. If a system was expensive enough and digital enough, people assumed its weaknesses must belong only to the previous generation. The old iron in local sheds did not merely look dated. It looked almost indecent, like somebody still using hand tools in a room full of battery packs. That spring, 3 of the largest operators in the northern part of the county had invested in new planters from the same equipment line, a line being praised for electrical simplicity, ironically enough, because it eliminated chains in favor of distributed drives, electronic meter management, and centralized control modules said to reduce mechanical maintenance. The dealerships talked about intelligence at the row. Instant adjustment. Real-time correction. Night readiness. Operators loved the idea because western Nebraska planting windows are sometimes won by whoever can keep moving while the rest of the county is solving problems in the yard. If the machines could truly run deep into the night with fewer stops and more accurate control, then the debt would feel like strategy rather than burden. That was the promise. Among those buyers was Brent Milliken, who farmed hard, talked fast, and considered himself the sort of man who had no time for nostalgia masquerading as prudence. Brent ran more acres than Vernon, newer tractors than Vernon, larger equipment of every kind, and a style of farming that made local lenders nod approvingly while older operators tried not to comment too loudly on what the notes behind it must look like. He had no use for Vernon's drill, and he said so often enough that the county no longer needed him to repeat it. Everybody already knew where he stood. One windy morning in March, while loading treated seed at the co-op, Brent saw Vernon's pickup parked beside the feed store and said to a small group standing nearby, "I swear if Kade plants anything with that old drill this year, I'm sending the Historical Society out for pictures." A few men laughed. Russ Fenner, a co-op agronomist who liked technology more than he trusted it, smiled and said, "Don't laugh too hard. His museum piece has missed fewer days than some brand new stuff I've seen." Brent shrugged. "Yeah, well, reliability's easy when you only run 10 acres an hour." Vernon, who had come in for hydraulic fittings and had heard every word without changing expression, set his purchase slip on the counter and said, 10 honest acres beat 40 imaginary ones." No one answered right away. That was Vernon's gift when he chose to use it. He could turn a sentence so plain it left men unsure whether they had just been insulted or instructed. Then he picked up the fittings and left town with the conversation still hanging in the air like dust. Now, what happened later would have been impossible if the season had behaved normally. Most dramatic reversals in farm country require weather to press down in exactly the right place. Spring 2016 cooperated with that requirement. April stayed cool longer than operators liked. Soil temperatures teased and retreated. A wet spell delayed early starts, then a sudden warming stretch turned everything urgent at once. The county switched from waiting to sprinting in the space of 4 days. Machines came out fast. Shops worked late. Service trucks ran county roads like ambulances. The new planters hit the fields under a mood of collective performance, and for a while the mood seemed justified. The screens lit. The row units behaved. The maps loaded. Dealers posted pictures. Men texted each other acreage numbers late into the evening with a mixture of pride and low-grade warfare. Vernon stayed out of the race. He had a smaller acreage plan and an older rhythm. He let some corn go in on time with help from Kade and a conventional planter he trusted enough not to talk about. The old drill, for the moment, remained in the shed. Vernon intended to use it later on a set of drought-prone acres he planned to put into a forage sorghum and millet mix if conditions lined up, plus a patch of ground behind a wheat field that had not decided yet whether it wanted another crop or merely rest. He watched the county charging ahead and said nothing. He had seen too many springs begin with impressive speed and end with men standing in half-lit sheds trying to understand which invisible failure had just taken half a week from them. By the third week of April, most of the big operators were planting deep into the night. That was the point of the new systems. Work while moisture was right. Finish before the next rain. Use lights, screens, auto-steer, row monitoring, and electric drive management to turn darkness into daytime with better data. Brent Milliken loved it. He called it stealing hours from the calendar. Russ Fenner, to his credit, warned more than one grower that the first season on any complex equipment is an expensive time to overestimate what you understand. Few listened. Planting speed is one of the most intoxicating drugs agriculture has ever invented. It makes men feel ahead of weather, ahead of debt, ahead of the county itself. The night everything changed was April 26. By then a narrow weather opening had appeared between two systems. The county knew exactly what that meant. If operators could push through that night and part of the next day, thousands of acres would be planted into near-perfect conditions. If they lost the window, the next rain would complicate everything. So they pushed. Brent was in the north 11:15, running a new 16-row planter behind a high-horsepower tractor with every screen in the cab glowing like a cockpit. Two other large operators nearby, Waylon Trask and the Givens brothers, were also out. Over the county radio chatter and text threads, the mood was all adrenaline and professional swagger. Acres were stacking. Moisture was right. The machines were doing exactly what winter sales meetings had promised. Then, at 11:43 p.m., Brent's planter went dark. Not dim. Not one module failing while the rest kept talking. Dark. The central control screen flashed once, stuttered through an error code no one had seen, and died. Row drive power dropped. Meter feedback vanished. The toolbar lights blinked out in uneven sequence. Brent coasted to a stop in the field and restarted the tractor twice before accepting the obvious truth that the problem was not impatience but power or communication somewhere in the system. He grabbed the manual, called the dealer's after-hours line, and got voicemail followed by an automated callback promise no man wants to hear when a planting window is leaking away into the night. 5 miles east, Waylon Trask's planter did the same thing 20 minutes later. By 12:30, one of the Givens brothers was on the phone telling somebody in Imperial that their machine had also lost the control network and would no longer meter seed. Same line. Same vintage. Same kind of failure. Different fields. Same county. Same midnight. If you have never watched modern confidence fail all at once, it is hard to explain the specific quiet that follows. It is not panic. Panic takes too much energy. It is a colder thing. A realization that all the power, price, branding, and digital elegance in the county has suddenly become dependent on one explanation no one nearby can produce. Brent spent an hour tracing harnesses with a flashlight. Whalen rebooted modules until dawn threatened. The Givens brothers hauled a service trailer into the field and started swapping fuses, then relays, then language. Nothing helped. By 2 a.m., 3 of the county's proudest new planters sat in dark fields like dead satellites. Morning made it worse. Dealership service lines lit up across the region. The local store had one field tech qualified to work deeply on the new planter control architecture, and he was already 90 miles away on another call. Corporate support suspected a firmware integrity issue triggered by a power management conflict after prolonged nighttime operation and a certain sequence of voltage fluctuation. That explanation meant exactly nothing to men with seed in boxes and moisture under their boots. A software patch might be coming. A module reset procedure might exist. Replacement controllers might need to ship. Nobody knew how long any of it would take. The one phrase everybody heard by mid-morning was the only phrase worse than unavailable. We're still trying to determine the issue. Planting windows do not care about diagnostic language. By noon, the county mood had changed from swagger to triage. Brent had acres lined up and a rain chance inside 48 hours. Whalen had custom planting commitments stacked behind his own ground. The Givens brothers had 3 hired men standing around a motionless machine while their father walked in and out of the shop office using silence as a form of profanity. Older operators, who had listened all winter to speeches about seamless night operation, began speaking in the flat tones of men trying not to enjoy the correction too openly. At the co-op, somebody asked Russ Fenner how smart those planters looked now. Russ said, "Not smart enough to explain themselves." That line was repeated before dinner. Vernon heard the first detailed version of the breakdowns around 1 in the afternoon when Cody came in from hauling seed and told him Brent's machine, Whalen's machine, and one of the Givens planters were all down with some kind of electrical or software blackout nobody local could fix quickly. Vernon was in the machine shed checking the drill's opener depth stops. He did not smile. He did not say "I told you so." He simply asked, how much ground they got sitting. Cody named the acres. Vernon nodded once and went back to the drill. Now, here is where the story turns in the way county stories always turn best, not on a speech, not on a public humiliation, but on a practical question nobody wanted to ask until necessity made dignity expensive. By late afternoon Brent Milliken had exhausted every direct option. The dealer could not promise help before the following day at the earliest. No loaner planter was available. Nearby operators were already busy. Custom crews were backed up across 2 counties. The weather window was closing. Brent stood in his yard looking at a machine so new it still smelled expensive and realized that the only plantable piece of seeding equipment he knew for certain could leave a shed and put seed in the ground immediately belonged to the man whose old drill he had spent 3 years mocking. He came over just before supper. Vernon was changing a seed box agitator sprocket when Brent pulled in. Cody looked up from the workbench, recognized the truck, and wisely disappeared to the back of the shed. Brent walked in with the careful stiffness of a man bringing a request he hates and needs at the same time. "You busy tomorrow?" he asked. Vernon kept working for another few seconds, enough to make the question settle honestly in the room. Then he said, "Depends who's asking." Brent exhaled once through his nose. "I need seed in the ground." Vernon looked at him. "Thought you had midnight capability." Brent accepted that. To his credit, he accepted it without trying to defend himself. "I had midnight capability until midnight." That was probably the exact answer Vernon wanted, because he set the wrench down then and asked what acres Brent had that could be put in with a drill if they quit caring about appearances and started caring about survival. Brent named a drought-prone 80 he'd intended for a forage mix after corn plans got rearranged, plus a failed stand area he might still salvage if seed could go in quickly. Vernon asked what seed. Brent told him. Sorghum Sudan, millet, a little cowpea. Vernon nodded toward the drill. This'll plant that, he said. Brent looked at the machine the way men look at bridges they mocked until the highway washed out. You serious? Vernon said, I don't keep museum pieces for decoration. They spent the next 2 hours setting rates. That was the first moment Brent truly understood what Vernon had meant by a machine knowing seed. The old drill required no boot sequence, no module handshake, no controller authorization, no wireless sync, no error log download. It required seed size, target rate, ground speed expectation, cup setting, gate position, chain selection, and the patience to check what actually dropped. Vernon brought out cans, a chalk stub, a notebook with previous settings, and a pocket scale so worn the numbers looked polished into the face. He and Brent jacked one wheel, turned the drive, caught seed, weighed it, adjusted, repeated. They talked less than men usually do while solving something real. Cody returned and helped load seed in the fading light. By dark, the old drill was hitched behind Vernon's older diesel tractor and ready. Brent asked what he owed. Vernon said, you can argue price after the rain misses or hits. Right now you owe daylight. They started at first light. Now, no one in Chase County mistook what that drill was doing for modern high-capacity planting. It was narrower. Slower. Demanding in a different way. Vernon checked depth more often. Cody walked behind at intervals. Brent, who usually ran operations from the cab with one hand on the wheel and another on a screen, spent half the day outside the tractor watching how the old drill entered the ground, how it handled residue, how it covered seed. He noticed how little drama attended it. The machine simply worked. Seed left the box. Seed traveled a visible path. Openers cut. Soil closed. If a cup hesitated, Vernon heard it. If a chain slackened, he saw it. When one feed gate picked up trash and started underfeeding, the whole correction took 3 minutes and a screwdriver. By noon they had planted more acres than Brent had expected possible. By evening the drought-prone 80 was in. The failed stand patch was partly done. Clouds were already building west with that gray-blue thickness the plains use when they mean business. Brent stood by the truck with dust on his face and watched Vernon grease the drill like a man putting away a tool he trusted, not a relic he merely admired. Should have asked sooner, Brent said. Vernon wiped his hands. Most people do. The rain came just after midnight. Not a flood, not enough to end all county worry, but enough to settle that planted seed into exactly the kind of conditions Brent had spent winter trying to buy through speed, precision, and complex uptime. The acres Vernon helped him plant came evenly. The forage stand caught well. The salvaged patch on the failed field emerged honest and uniform enough that Brent later admitted, privately first and then in public, that if he had waited on dealer support instead of going to Vernon, he would have missed the window and probably abandoned those acres altogether. The county saw all of this. That is the part no man can control once a reversal starts. Waylon Trask eventually got one planter back through a field patch and a temporary controller reset. The Givens brothers lost almost 3 full days. Brent lost less than 1 because he had swallowed his pride fast enough to go where reliability still lived. People noticed who moved and who waited. People noticed which acres were planted before the rain and which sat too long. And people noticed that the machine everyone said belonged in a museum had, in the 1 week when technology most needed to prove its superiority, become the most dependable seeding tool in the northern part of the county. By the following week the story had grown teeth. At the co-op somebody asked Brent whether the Historical Society had gotten their pictures. Brent, who could have lied, shrugged and said, they can if they want. That old drill saved me more acres than my new planter did. Nobody laughed at that, at least not the way they had laughed in March. Russ Fenner asked Vernon whether he'd consider bringing the drill to a winter grower meeting if the county wanted to talk about backup systems and mechanical transparency. Vernon said, "Only if they let me leave before the PowerPoint starts." That line did get a laugh, but now it was the laugh people give a man whose authority has recently been certified by weather and failure. The dealer eventually solved the planter problem, or part of it. A firmware patch came down. Power routing recommendations changed. A shielding issue in one harness group was discovered to worsen the nighttime voltage behavior. Service bulletins were issued with enough polished language to make it sound almost routine. But farm country judges fixes by season cost, not by technical elegance after the fact. Acres lost are remembered. Windows missed are remembered. Seeding saved are remembered even better, especially when saved by the very thing people mocked for being outdated. That summer, Brent came to Vernon's place twice more. The first time was to return seed boxes he'd borrowed and settle the planting money. Vernon named a fair price. Brent paid without bargaining and then stood in the shed looking at the old drill for longer than a customer should. Finally he asked whether Vernon had ever considered selling it. Vernon said, "No." Brent nodded. "Didn't think so." The second time Brent came with his son, Noah, who was 15 and still at the age where boys believe most machinery older than their fathers must have functioned through superstition. Brent asked Vernon if he would show the boy how to set the drill. Cody was there that day too, and the four of them spent 2 hours running through feed cups, rate charts, chain changes, depth levers, clean-out slides, and what Vernon called listening for honest failure. Noah asked what that meant. Vernon rested one hand on the drill box and said, "Means a machine ought to fail where a man can still meet it." That sentence stayed with Brent longer than he admitted. By harvest, the county had incorporated the spring's humiliation into its storytelling the way rural counties always do when they cannot entirely deny what happened. Some men still defended the new planters, and fairly enough, because new equipment did plenty of good work once fixed. Some insisted the failure had been rare and would never happen again, which is exactly what people say before other rare failures line up in other expensive seasons. But almost nobody joked openly about Vernon Kade's drill anymore. The museum line disappeared first. Then the historical society jokes. In their place came a different tone, half respect and half unease, because the county had been forced to confront a fact it preferred not to think about. Complexity borrows confidence from distance. Simplicity earns it up close. That winter, during a panel discussion at a machinery meeting in Imperial, somebody asked a room full of growers what they had learned from the season. Men gave ordinary answers first. Check harness routing. Don't assume software maturity in year one. Keep dealer contacts close. Watch voltage under load. Then Russ Fenner, sitting near the back, said, "Learn at least one machine on your farm all the way down to the chain level." Heads turned. Russ continued. "You don't have to farm old. But you'd better keep one tool around that doesn't need permission to work." The room went quiet in the useful way. Vernon did not attend that meeting. He had chores. But word got back to him. He reacted the way he reacted to most delayed respect. He shrugged, wrote a few notes in one of his narrow spiral books, and replaced 2 worn rubber seed tubes on the old drill because winter was when honest machines got thanked. The following spring, more than one operator in Chase County quietly pulled an older piece of seeding equipment out of the back of a shed and spent time getting it field ready. Not because everyone suddenly became antique romantics. Because they had seen what happens when progress goes dark in a field at midnight and the only thing standing between a farm and a missed window is whether someone nearby still knows how to plant without asking a screen for permission. Brent kept his new planter. He fixed it, updated it, and ran it hard. He was not converted into a zealot for old iron. Life is usually subtler than that. But he changed. He stopped mocking visible backups. He bought an older narrow drill at an auction 2 counties over and rebuilt it with Noah on winter weekends. He started asking harder questions at dealer meetings, not just what a system could do when everything was perfect, but what it needed when it was not. That may not sound like much, but in modern agriculture a man learning to ask failure-shaped questions is often the beginning of wisdom. And Vernon Kade kept doing what he had always done. He greased chains, checked cups, stored the drill under canvas, ran it when needed, ignored fashion, listened closely. He did not become a local celebrity or a social media symbol of anti-tech virtue. He remained a farmer with a known machine and a private patience for county opinion. Which is probably why the lesson lasted. If he had preached, people would have dismissed him. Instead he simply waited until reality needed his drill more than it needed its own pride. They said the old drill belonged in a museum. Then the new planters went dark at midnight. And when the county needed seed in the ground before the rain, it turned not to the brightest screen in the county, but to the machine that still knew exactly what it was for.